My name's Todd Lanigan. I'm Forest Health Specialist with the DNR, and I cover 13 counties. Forest Health has the state divided up into 6 different zones. So I cover from St. Croix, Dunn, Chippewa, Eau Claire, Clark, Jackson, Monroe, Juneau, La Crosse. I cover that chunk of 13 counties. Um, and I work out of the Eau Claire office. So first thing we're going to talk about is white pine tip weevil. If you look at this white pine right here, you'd be able to see where I pruned out some branches, and you can see where it's forking. What white pine weevil does is it feeds on the terminal leader. In the spring of the year, the female emerges from the soil, and she does what's called maturation feeding, and that's just feeding for her to mature. So she's got little niches in that leader. So if you see a lot of pitch and niches on your white pine leader in spring, more than likely you got white pine weevil going on. And so the female will lay her egg in those niches, and then the larvae actually feed downwards towards the whorl, the next whorl of branches. And usually they stop at that first whorl, but sometimes they go past that as well. So later in the year, you're going to see the leader turning brown and forming a shepherd's hook. You can prune those out, but just don't leave them laying on the ground. What you need to do is take them with you and either burn them, bury them, or destroy them somehow. Because if you leave them lay there, the larvae can still emerge, and then you're still going to have tip weevil issues. And they cause the forking, so what you can do is just wait for a year or two and determine which lateral branch is the most dominant and the straightest, and then you prune off the rest of those branch whorls to form a single leader again. White pine tip weevil usually attacks trees 20 feet tall, and then they kind of stop, but there's always exceptions. There's times where they'll go higher up, and you can get trees that have been hit 2, 3, 4 times by white pine weevil. So if you prune out the laterals that aren't as healthy as the biggest one that you found, within 400 years you're not even going to know it's been hit by tip weevil.
I certainly won't in 400 years.
Me either. So,
Beyond my,
He won't care.
beyond my regime.
by looking at this white pine initially, I was thinking it was white pine blister rust. It's a fungal disease, and you get really heavy, can get really heavy pitch flow on the trunk of the tree. But this is not white pine blister rust. If you come up and look at the tree closely, you can see big globs of pitch in between the whorls, and then globs of pitch at the branch whorls themselves. So the one in between the whorls is called the pitch mass borer. It's a moth. So the caterpillar is actually feeding in between the bark and the wood of the tree. And Zimmerman pine moth, again, is another moth, and the caterpillar is feeding the same way between the bark and the wood of the tree. These can cause defects, or they do cause defects in the trees. So if you have a high windstorm, ice storm, heavy snow, the tree could actually snap off where that feeding was done by them, by the pitch mass borer or Zimmerman pine moth. But it's usually more of a problem in Christmas trees, because if the tree accidentally falls down, you get half a tree, so you lose the top. So that's what's going on with this tree, but there's a couple other insects I want to talk about. One is red turpentine beetle, and they attack the lower trunk of the tree. Literature says they can attack about 6 foot on down. I've seen it maybe 5 foot high at the highest. But what you're going to find on them is you're going to find pitch again, but it's going to be a pitch tube. It's going to look like a tube. And the part closest to the trunk of the tree is going to be that reddish brown color. And then the outer edge is going to be a creamish white color. And you'll still actually see the hole where the insect actually bored into the trunk of the tree. Old red pine turpentine beetle pitch tubes, they're going to dry up, they're going to crumble, they're going to fall at the base of the tree. But it's going to be really grainy in large chunks of pitch. So once you see that, you kind of have an idea what's going on there.
How far does that protrude from the bark?
It can be, I've seen it probably as far out as a ½ inch. So then the other main bark beetle is called the pine engraver beetle or pine bark beetle, Ips bark beetle. It's got a ton of different names. And that beetle attacks trees, conifers, you know, red, white, jack pine, spruce, attacks mid-crown. So if you start seeing the color of the crown going from the deep green to a pale green, straw yellow, red, that means you have bark beetles in those trees, pine engraver beetles, and they work their way from the top on down. The pine bark beetle, pine engraver, they keep their galleries very clean, so they keep pushing out boring dust. So if you think you might have bark beetles, you can look at understory leaves, broadleaf leaves for real fine reddish brown boring dust, like on a red or jack pine. You can peel the bark scales off and you can find that boring dust trapped underneath the bark scales. Or spider webs. Spider webs are a great place to find this boring dust. And so with the pine bark beetle, once it's down lower on the trunk, it's going to look like somebody came in and shot it with a shotgun, because you're going to have all these little BB-sized holes in the bark. And again, they're cutting off the flow of nutrients to the tree. That's why you get that crown discoloration, the fading. And these bark beetles, turpentine beetle, pine engraver beetle, they like stress trees. Stress trees are much easier to attack than healthy trees. But if you get a bark beetle outbreak, it doesn't matter. The trees can be healthy and they're still going to take them out. So bark beetles, the turpentine beetle, pine engraver beetle are endemic. They're always around. So you could lose a tree here or a couple of trees here and there in your stand. One thing I always kind of found interesting is if you have a red pine stand, it's always the biggest, nicest red pine in that row that's killed by bark beetles. And I think that's because that tree just needs that much more extra room for growing space. The other trees are crowding it and stressing it out. So I always found that interesting. The biggest,
I've always found
healthiest
that
tree.
interesting too, and like in this situation, I mean, you got this tree next to it that's obviously, you know, in much poorer position than that one, but yet the insects are attacking that one.
Yeah.
Why?
Who knows?
Taste.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, this one might be a little more stressed for whatever reason, even though,
That
you
one's
know,
got a nice, true, straight stem.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
these two here, both have been hit with a tip weevil.
yeah. So it's usually the nicest tree that gets hit.
Yeah, I've noticed that, and I've always tried to figure out why. I mean, why is the nicest, most dominant, most vigorous tree the one that gets hit?
Because that's what it is. It's the biggest, nicest, most dominant. you
Yeah,
know?
but the insects aren't supposed to attack them unless they're under stress. And you think, well, this tree next to it is definitely under stress.
You think so? 'Cause
Why
it's
didn't
on
they
the
take that one?
interior,
Yeah, yeah.
So
Why do you eat the biggest, nicest, juiciest berries?
I'm not an insect.
Good.
but
Maybe they're smarter than we think.
yeah,
Maybe they're smarter than we think. Yeah.
yeah. Well, insects aren't dumb. You know, they have a different smartness. They can tell trees that are under stress, like southern pine bark beetle down south. There's little gaps in the flow of nutrients in the tree, so there's little like popping noises, and they can pick up on that, and that's the tree they go attack. So there's little cues that they use. If you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah,
I'd be interested.
definitely. Yeah.
That could be a PhD study.
It could
for you.
be, yeah.
So, again, this heavy pitching is very similar to what you'll see on white pine blister rust, but if you see it, that doesn't always mean you have blister rust.
Sapsucker damage will also do that.
Correct. Sapsucker is a migratory woodpecker, and they make oblong holes in the bark of the trees, and it'll be in a really nice pattern, either straight up and down or circular. And what they're doing is they're drinking the sap. They aren't looking for insects. But if an insect gets in there, they're just going to get a little protein with their drink. They'll take the insects as well. I would say if you got a tree that the sapsuckers really like, leave that tree alone. Because if you take it down or deter them from going to that tree, they're going to find another one, probably in the yard. So kind of leave that one alone, let them have that one until it dies. Woodpeckers in general, if you have wood siding and they're starting to beat on your house, making holes, you can put burlap over the hole. They don't like burlap. Or you can use hardware cloth, that wire hardware cloth, and put it around the hole, but you have to get that pulled off so that they can't get their beaks into the siding. And you can use burlap and the hardware cloth on the trees as well, but a lot of times you're going to have to be part monkey to get up there to get that in there. These trees are dying from emerald ash borer. But if you look around, you got some ash that still have decent crowns, like this one isn't bad, and that one back there has a nice crown. These could be actually lingering ash, which are somewhat resistant to emerald ash borer. So we like seeing these kind of trees around because they provide us hope that we can get ash back onto the landscape. Otherwise, emerald ash borer, they take out all the true ashes, the genus Fraxinus. So in Wisconsin, that's the green, white, black, and blue ash. Blue ash is in the southeastern part of the state. And then again, you got all those ash cultivars that are planted in cities and yards. So all those emerald ash borer will attack. If you have a mountain ash, that'll be fine because it's not a true ash. But if you come and look at this tree, you can see where the galleries of the beetles are. It's very zigzag galleries, and again, it's cutting off the flow of nutrients to the tree. And if you find larvae underneath the bark of the tree, they're emerald ash borer larvae will be creamish white. It'll be flat, but each body segment will flare out so it looks like a bell. So if you find this flat white larvae underneath the bark of an ash that looks like it has bells going down it, that's emerald ash borer larvae. There are native insects that attack ash as well, so just because you have a dying ash doesn't necessarily mean it's from emerald ash borer. Then on this tree, I was doing a little digging. It's not a great example of armillaria. Usually I can find armillaria like nobody's business. I couldn't find it here. So if you look at this lateral root, you'll see some chocolate brown staining. That's an indication of armillaria root rot. And then I was able to find some signs of armillaria root rot. Armillaria is found in all soils of the state, and it doesn't care if the tree is a conifer or a hardwood, it'll still attack it. Armillaria normally doesn't kill a tree, but it stresses it. So then that allows for these secondary organisms to come in, like pine bark beetle or turpentine beetle or whatever. But it actually produces what are called rhizomorphs. They look like black shoestrings growing through the soil. And another name for this root rot is the shoestring root rot because of those rhizomorphs. And these rhizomorphs can actually start growing towards a root system, and I can never remember if the roots are low in sugar or if it's low in starch. But anyways, it can determine, kind of figure that out somehow, and it can actually start bending and growing towards that. And then it colonizes the tree, the root system. If the tree is healthy, it's able to wall that off, that infection. But as the tree becomes more and more stressed, it's able to break through that barrier and colonize more of the tree. So armillaria is a very slow death for a tree, but like I say, usually secondary organisms come in and finish it off quicker. But armillaria is a creepy crawly death, so you could have a tree over here that died, you could have one way over there that died. And it also produces mycelial fans underneath the bark. So when you peel the bark off, you can see it on the wood and on the backside of the bark. And I've got some examples here that I'll pass around. It's hard to see, but there's some really fine white mycelium on the underside of that bark there. And if you get the classic example of a mycelial fan, it's going to look like a scalloped seashell, just like the Shell gas station symbol. That's the classic. Rarely do you find that classic, but it's very flat mycelium pressed up against the trunk of the tree. Then usually in the spring, or fall of the year rather, Armillaria produces mushrooms. And they're called a honey mushroom because the cap is kind of a honey color. And it comes out in like a single stalk. And years ago, they always said Armillaria was good eating mushrooms. Actually, we had some at a marking camp, didn't we, with Marinello? He was a forester, sorry. But now they're saying they're slightly toxic. So who knows? But none of us died, so I thought they were good. So those are found in usually the fall of the year, but if it's a wet year, you can get them in spring as well. Emerald ash borer, when they emerge out of the tree, they create a D-shaped, D as in Delta or dog, exit hole, and they're only about 1/8 of an inch wide. And that D can be orientated any way on the trunk. So I've got some exit holes here circled. If you want to come up and take a look, you can see the D shape, and like I said, they're only about 1/8 of an inch long. So if you see that D shape, and it's only about 1/8 of an inch, that's emerald ash borer. There's another emerald ash borer, belongs to the group of beetles called buprestid beetles or metallic wood borers. They're starting to call them jewel beetles now because there are some really pretty buprestid beetles out there. But there's a much larger D-shaped exit hole. All the buprestid beetles are going to form a D-shaped exit hole. Insects, again, they're kind of smart, so they chew their way out of the tree in whatever body shape they have. So if you see pines with big circular holes in them, that would be pine sawyer, because they kind of look like they're cigar shaped. Oh yeah, and that reminds me of something else now. In pines or spruce, if you have a dead tree or a log pile sitting and you hear a sound, that's the pine sawyer larvae feeding underneath the bark, and you'll find real long chips of sawdust or wood, whatever you want to call it, where they've been chewing. And if you are harvesting pine or spruce during the summer, you need to get those logs out of there within 3 weeks after they've been cut, because if there's any of those pine engraver beetles in there or even turpentine beetles in there, they can still emerge, and then they can attack the residual trees in the stand, and those trees are definitely going to be stressed from the harvest. So
And the pine sawyers, those are the
longhorn beetle, yep.
borer, and you'll see them during the summer. They'll fly and they'll land on you. They got those real long antennae.
Yeah, they're black. Yeah, and if you harass them, they'll actually lower down on their rear legs, raise up on their front legs, and hiss at you. It's kind of cool. You got to have fun with them. So I can take that.
And as far as the emerald ash borer, a little on that history, Todd, of where that came from.
Emerald ash borer came from Asia. We're thinking it was China, and it was first found in lower Michigan in 2002. But by doing, what do they call it, dendrochronology or something like that, they determined that the beetle was actually there 10 years before it was actually found. Emerald ash borer is very cryptic because they start attacking the tree in the upper crown first, and so you can go years without even knowing you have it. Then eventually you start getting the branch decline, die back, and then you start seeing the exit holes.
And just an observation, my folks lived in northwest Ohio, so just south of where it was first found. And they had a small 1-acre plantation, white pine ash, on their farmette. And it got hit they were about 15 years old at the time. And the last I saw it was a couple of years ago before we sold the property. And it's kind of interesting, some of the ash were just killed outright. Others, like the one over here, didn't hardly even seem to be bothered by it. And then others, just hang in there. They keep resprouting and et cetera, et cetera. So, it doesn't. I guess it doesn't wipe out the ash. They get to seed-bearing age, and then it'll hit them.
Yeah.
So, it's always spreading seed. So maybe over time, maybe.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, emerald ash borer can actually attack ash trees down to 1 inch in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to get many emerald ash borers
Well,
out of there.
but in theirs, it's not hitting it that small. They're getting up to about this size
Mhm.
before they get hit. And like I say, there's trees like this one that don't even have appeared to have been even bothered the whole time.
Yeah, that's
there
why
are-
we're hoping that
Yeah.
what we call the lingering ash are showing some resistance, and then that way, hopefully, we get ash back
Yeah,
on
and
the
there's
landscape.
probably 5 or 6 of those in that 1-acre plot.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Ash, I think, is going to be a lot like American elm. You're always going to
Mhm.
have a few sprouting back up. Then eventually, the elm bark beetles find it and kill it, and I think that's the way emerald ash borer is going to work.
Mhm.
The big concern is northern Wisconsin with all the black ash swamps.
well, yeah, we got
Trying to
lots of
figure
that,
out
yeah.
how to manage that.
Well,
But,
and then the ash borer got spread a lot through firewood, people moving
Right.
firewood around. It first popped up in western Wisconsin down by La Crosse area.
Yep.
Then Black River, Eau Claire, and slowly all these centers are starting to come together, coalesce. This is the first site I've seen it in a natural wooded setting other than in town. But I think it's going to be more, they're all coming together, it seems.
yeah. Yeah, we're still tracking where emerald ash borer is found, especially in new counties where it hasn't been found. Oh man, I don't remember how many counties it's been found in now. Last count that I remember, it was 52 out of the 72 counties emerald ash borer has been found in.
Been found, but it's probably in those other counties too.
I'm sure it's statewide. We just haven't found it yet because, like I say, it's very cryptic, hard to find. So, but yep. So we'll go back to this white pines. If you look close on here, you can see like little white spots on the bark, and that's pine bark adelgid. It's a very common insect on white pine bark, and then some white pines you'll actually see where the trunk looks like it's flocked, like a Christmas tree. The tree's healthy. Pine bark adelgid really doesn't bother the tree any because you can get it on branches as well. It used to be an aphid, but then taxonomists took a look at it and decided, no, it's an adelgid. So, but whatever, you may have known it as a white pine aphid, but now it's white pine adelgid. So if you've got any white pine in your yard and you've got the adelgid on it, if you take a garden hose that has pretty good pressure on it and just wash up and down the trunk of the tree, that'll wipe them out. Then on this branch here, this has Pidiogenes bark beetle galleries in it, and normally Pidiogenes just takes out branches. There's no common name for that one, sorry. But back in 2012 and then last year, these Pidiogenes beetles were taking out sapling and small pole size white pine. They were killing them. I'm not sure what the trigger was for that. 2012 we had been in droughts and mini droughts for a few years before that. That might have been the trigger. Last year was kind of a dry year again where we had all that moisture, so I don't know if that stressed out the white pine again. but it's very small galleries underneath the bark. And if the tree's attacked by Pidiogenes in the bark, you'll see very small pitch tubes coming out. They're going to be that reddish brown color, but it's going to be about the size of a pinhead. Very small exit holes, but it's just going to be riddled with those holes. So that's been an issue on and off with Pidiogenes beetles. And going back to just white pine in general, a lot of people didn't like planting white pine because of white pine blister rust, white pine tip weevil. If you plant white pine, you know, a little denser, or, you know, when you're doing your first harvest, if you have trees that have blister rust or are weevilled, just discriminate against them and take them out. And then you're going to have a lot less issues with those two things. And then with any fungal disease, if you're just planting conifers, if you can mow the area where the trees are planted, that'll reduce the amount of moisture around those trees, because diseases need moisture, high humidities in order to produce spores, and then for those spores to disperse and then germinate on whatever plant the disease affects. And then as the trees get larger, you know, keep mowing for a bit yet, but if you prune out some of the lower whorl of branches, again, that's going to increase airflow just like the mowing. So that's going to help dry that area out and eliminate a lot of the disease issues. So this white pine here, it's not a great example, but it looks like white pine blister rust, and usually on the trunk of the tree, blister rust is going to look like that one with the Zimmerman pine and pitch mass borer. It's just going to have tons of pitch flowing out of it. And white pine blister rust requires two hosts. The alternate host is gooseberries or currants. So the underside of those leaves, they're going to produce kind of an orangish colored spore, and then that's disseminated through wind. And then those spores will land at the base of the needle of the white pine, and it eventually grows down the branch. And you can get dead branches, branch flagging, where the needles all turn red. Then in the spring of the year, if you've got them on the branches, blister rust, it's going to get kind of rough looking, and then you're going to get this big mass of orange spores coming out. And you can get the same thing on the trunk of the tree. White pine blister rust forms a canker on the trunk of the tree, and it can be down low or it can be up high. So again, if you have a high windstorm, ice storm, heavy snows, the tree can snap off at that point.
Have you noticed? Because I noticed this on my place up in Sawyer County. Something, I don't know if it's mice or some critter, loves to eat those cankers. And I've had several instances where it has entirely eaten the canker and eliminated it from the tree.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. And the tree's grown over that. You know, there's obviously a defect in there, but the tree's grown over that with no other apparent problems.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what it is that's eating them.
Yeah.
But they love them.
I've seen squirrels, well, there's other rust diseases on pines. One's called eastern pine gall rust. It's going to look like a ball on the branch of like a jack pine. So I've seen squirrels eating the bark off of those. And then it's not very common, but there's, on jack pine, it's called stoliciform stem rust. And it's just comes out a little bit from the trunk of the tree, and the squirrels will chew the bark off of those too. So I don't know if it's because where those galls are, it's more pitchy, and they're going for that pitch.
There's something they like about it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is,
but they entirely eat the canker. I mean, it's gone.
Yeah. Some of the control tactics that they use for white pine blister rust is if you get a blister canker, you know, farther out on the branch, and it's not within 6 inches of the trunk, you can prune that out. And that shouldn't be infecting the trunk then. But if you've got a small trunk canker, what they'd say to do is excise that canker out. So you'd want to cut like a football shaped out of the trunk of the tree to remove that canker, and then because of the shape it should heal over good with callus tissue. I don't know if the taking the canker off on the main trunk works or not, but it's something to try, you know, if it's down low enough and you feel like experimenting.
I'd rather import the squirrels and have them do it.
Okay, that works too. They're good in this crock pot stew.
Yeah.
But then heterobasidian root disease, as far as I know it's not here. That's a root rot disease, and that one, in my opinion, is the real deal. You do not want to get that in your stand, because once you get it in your stand, it's going to be there for decades. The site's not going to be as productive as it once was, and it affects pines, spruce, fir, all conifers. It actually even grows on hardwoods, where on the conifers, HRD kills the conifer, but on the hardwoods they seem to be surviving. But we haven't seen it that much and for that long on hardwood, so we're not sure if it'll kill it or not. But they produce a fruiting body, a conch, shelf fungus, whatever you want to call it, down low on the trunk of the tree, and it could actually be in the duff layer. So we scrape that away, and the excuse me, the bracket fungi, shelf fungus, wow, is going to be brown on top, and then the edge is going to be a kind of creamish white, and the underside, when it's actually producing spores, is going to be bright white, and you can have needles, branches, twigs incorporated into that fruiting body. So if you go to the DNR website and then go on to Forest Health, we have a HRD guideline in there that gives you a bunch of different options for managing HRD. And there's also a guideline for emerald ash borer and oak wilt as well. So if you harvest conifers, I highly recommend, well, pine and spruce, highly recommend using a stump treatment. And there's two products labeled in Wisconsin. One is called Cellutreat, which is a borate product, kind of like 20 Multein borax. And then the other one is called Rotstop C, which is a biological control. And so both of these are water soluble. And a lot of loggers now have spray attachments on their processors so that when they cut the tree, they're just treating the stump automatically. A lot of times the loggers will put a dye in with the Cellutreat so they can tell what stumps have been treated, and we're only recommending treating merchantable stumps. And then the Rotstop C, which is a biological, you spray on the stump, and it's a Phlebiopsis, which is a native fungus here in Wisconsin. And what that does is it out-competes the HRD spore, so it doesn't allow it to germinate in that stump. There is winter restrictions, so if it's being harvested December 1st through the end of March, we do not require treatment of stumps because these products are water soluble, so if it's below 32 degrees, that spray is not coming out. But hopefully there's going to be enough snow that covers the stumps that are cut anyways. But if it's, who knows what fall and winter is around Wisconsin anymore, but if it's still above 32 degrees and you're in that December time period or March, I'd still recommend treating the stumps. Because like I say, there's a horn.
There's the horn, yeah.
So that concludes what I have to say. Any questions real quick? Or
I have my wife white spruce, they get to be really nice and they're taller, 50 feet tall or whatever. All of a sudden there's a patch on the trunk that's bleeding pitch or whatever, and within 2 years that tree is dead. What is that? In other words,
Is it-
critters that bore in and
Yeah, it could be the pitch mast borer. It could be, depending on where on the trunk, or
usually here or up a little higher or
yeah.
whatever.
But I mean, if it's in between the branch whorls or at the branches, it could be either pitch mast borer, Zimmerman pine moth. It could actually be Cytospora canker, which is a fungal disease that can affect the trunk and cause heavy pitching. You could have armillaria root rot down below. You could have bark beetles in there as well.
This is usually on the trunk where I trimmed the tree years ago. And
Yeah.
it's just a straight trunk with no branches whatsoever.
Oh, okay.
All
Well,
of a sudden the patch is there, and
yeah,
within 2 years, like I said, it kills the tree.
yeah. It still could be Cytospora canker that came in from the branch that you didn't catch in time. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a whole multitude of things it could be. And
I just sprinkle it in the plantations, red pine and white pine and spruce
Yeah.
every now and then. But yet, whatever this is, it finds the spruce and does it in.
yeah. Yeah, in case you haven't figured it out, forest health, we're kind of doom and gloom. But
It's a depressing
Somebody's
job.
gotta do
yeah,
it.
Depressing job.